After Iran grabbed 2 ships in Hormuz, Trump suddenly appears to slam the brakes, looking less like a blockade boss and more like a president spooked by escalation. Instead of dramatic seizures at sea, Trump is now quietly ordering Iranian tankers to turn back, fueling whispers that Mojtaba's retaliation has him thinking twice. Barely days into his so-called forever truce, Trump is accused of a second surrender to Iran, as battlefield reality exposes what his own army can't enforce. With more than 34 Iranian ships reportedly slipping through Hormuz, critics say Trump is finally waking up to a harsh truth: his navy isn't in control of this choke point. US military forces have now moved the Iran oil showdown into Asian waters, intercepting multiple Iranian-flagged tankers far from the Gulf, according to Reuters. Sources say at least 3 of those Iranian tankers, operating near India, Malaysia, and Sri Lanka, were ordered to change course and abandon their original voyages. Shipping and security officials report that the vessels were deliberately redirected away from their planned routes, effectively cutting them off from intended buyers. One of the ships singled out was the Iranian-flagged Deep Sea, a fully-fledged supertanker intercepted while operating close to Malaysian waters. Another tanker, the Sevin, was reported to be partly loaded with crude and had been lingering off Malaysia for weeks before being brought under US scrutiny. A third large carrier, the Dorena, was fully loaded with crude and closely monitored as it sailed near the southern coast of India. Central Command later said Dorena was placed under escort by a US Navy destroyer after it allegedly tried to violate the terms of Washington's oil blockade. An additional tanker, named Derya, may also have been intercepted after it reportedly failed to complete an Iranian oil delivery to a customer in India, according to sources. Overall, reports suggest that nearly 30 vessels have now been ordered to turn back or return to port since the US-led blockade effort began. All of these interceptions are taking place under a US-led campaign explicitly designed to restrict Iran's ability to export oil by sea. At the same time, Iran has stepped up its own actions against commercial shipping in and around the Strait of Hormuz, targeting foreign-flagged vessels to hit back. These moves on both sides come after nearly 2 months of open conflict involving the US, Israel, and Iran, with no credible peace talks yet in sight. Disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz have already affected close to 1/5 of global oil and gas supplies, amplifying the stakes of every interception and countermove. In recent weeks, the US has already seized at least 1 Iranian cargo ship and an oil tanker at sea, signaling a broader effort to squeeze Tehran's maritime logistics. Iran, for its part, claims it has detained 2 container ships that tried to exit the Gulf, saying its forces opened fire and then boarded the vessels as retaliation. "34 Iran-linked tankers have bypassed the US naval blockade around Hormuz," the Financial Times reported, citing tracking data from Vortexa. These vessels slipped through despite US claims that the embargo has been a tremendous success, highlighting gaps in enforcement. The US imposed a blockade on all ships entering or leaving Iranian coastal waters on April 13th, as part of its wartime pressure campaign. On April 16th, the embargo was expanded to cover Iran-linked ships globally, including so-called dark fleet tankers operating far from the Gulf. Nevertheless, 19 tankers tied to Iran exited the Persian Gulf through the blockade undeterred, according to the Vortexa-based analysis. At the same time, 15 tankers entered the Gulf from the Arabian Sea en route towards Iran, adding to the tally of successful transits. At least 6 outbound vessels were confirmed to be carrying Iranian crude shipments totaling about 10.7 million barrels. Based on typical discounts to Brent crude, that cargo volume was estimated to be worth roughly $910 million in revenue for Iran. One Iranian-flagged supertanker, the Dorena, exited the Gulf with its AIS transponder turned off, according to Vortexa's tracking data. Satellite data earlier showed the Dorena had conducted a ship-to-ship transfer near Malaysia in March, a common tactic used to disguise sanctioned oil's origin. Such ship-to-ship transfers are widely used by tankers carrying sanctioned crude to conceal where the oil was loaded and who ultimately receives it. US-sanctioned vessels including the Merlikishan and Alicia also entered the Gulf via the Gulf of Oman during this period, data showed. So far, the US has detained 1 tanker in the Gulf of Oman and boarded another vessel in the Indo-Pacific as part of blockade enforcement. US Central Command claims that naval forces have directed 28 vessels to turn back to Iranian ports after radio contact and interception orders. Despite agreeing on April 21 to extend the ceasefire with Iran, Trump has refused to lift the Hormuz blockade, keeping the maritime restrictions in place. US President Donald Trump announced on April 21 that the current ceasefire with Iran would be extended, altering the timeline for the temporary pause in hostilities. In a post on his Truth social platform, Trump said that attacks will be held off until Iran puts forward a formal proposal, tying the extension to the prospect of a new diplomatic offer. The truce, which had been set to expire on April 22, was extended at the request of Pakistani mediators, as Trump stated, reflecting their continued role as a back-channel broker. Hours earlier, Trump had publicly expressed that he was not in favor of prolonging the ceasefire, according to Al Jazeera coverage of his on-the-record remarks, underscoring the last-minute nature of the reversal. On X, Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif also expressed gratitude to Trump for extending the ceasefire, welcoming the decision as a chance to preserve the diplomatic window. Donald Trump said, and I quote, "I have therefore directed our military to continue the blockade and, in all other respects, remain ready and able, and will therefore extend the ceasefire until such time as their proposal is submitted, and discussions are concluded, one way or the other." Meanwhile, Iran continues to insist that removing the US blockade is a necessary precondition for any new round of negotiations. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, has called the blockade an act of war, and has even likened it to a form of maritime piracy, underlining the gravity with which Tehran views the measure. Araghchi has explicitly linked the resumption of negotiations to an end to hostilities against Iran's commercial shipping, demanding that Washington first lift the restrictions before talks. Meanwhile, President Trump has suggested that Iran wants the Strait of Hormuz kept open primarily to avoid major economic losses, portraying Tehran's interest in the waterway as driven by financial concerns. Trump has argued that lifting the blockade without a prior deal would weaken the United States' leverage in negotiations, insisting that Washington must maintain pressure. Iran has reportedly listed the targets it would hit if US and Israeli strikes on its territory restart, signaling that Tehran is again pointing to the region's critical energy arteries as potential pressure points. Iran's Tasnim News released what it described as an IRGC-linked target list on April 21, as fresh warnings surfaced over how Tehran could respond if the war restarts. The IRGC would reportedly target the Yanbu pipeline system in Saudi Arabia, which is widely seen as a major alternative route for oil exports that bypasses the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's military would also reportedly target the UAE's Fujairah oil facilities and the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, both of which are central to efforts to reroute energy flows away from Hormuz. If Iran were to hit those three pressure points, the impact on global crude oil supply could be severe because Yanbu, Fujairah, and Bab al-Mandeb all serve as key alternatives or choke points for international energy shipments.